And welcome back to my third installment of the Dye With Me series from The Little Wolf Knits. My name's Brianna and I am the dyer behind The Little Wolf Knits if you're just stumbling across these videos. There are a few other if you go down to my channel and you can check out some of those. This month we'll be dyeing up the colorway for Grand Teton National Park. I had an option of 2 different color palettes. Y'all were pretty decided. One was a little bit more green leaning, one was more blue leaning. Y'all want the green one. So I'm going to flip this camera around and show you the inspiration photo. My yarn is already soaking with my citric acid in a water bath. If you want to know how I do that, I'll put the first video here where I walk through some of those instructions. You can go check that out, pause this video, and then come back and get into some color inspiration. All right, so here's the photo, and you can see the color palette is already on it. I took this photo while we were traveling in Grand Teton. It was a really cool stream that was running pretty forcefully through the park. There's some variation in the trees. It was August when we went, so I think there's some leaves starting to turn. They actually might be dry leaves. The slog and the water running over the rocks. So I pulled a lot of green inspiration from this palette. You can see a really soft, the bottom one almost looks white, icy sort of blue. When you look at the edges of the water, you can see just the smallest hint of that icy blue, where a lot of the water that we're seeing is foam, sort of rushing over the rocks, and you see a lot of movement there. Then we have this army green color. I think this is a staple. It's probably my favorite green, and it's what I tend to pull out the most when I'm doing green colors. You could see it up in the trees, in some of the shrubbery, or at the back of this photo. If we go one step up, there's a really nice chartreuse. I think all of these technically fall in the chartreuse range, thanks to Ginkgo bee. I know a little bit more about that. That's a little bit more green leaning. We see it over on the left side of the trees here at the leftmost part and the rightmost part of the picture. Some of those brighter, I think that's new growth on some of these trees. The next step up is really a light steel gray that has just subtle undertones of blue underneath it. And then the topmost color, again, is chartreuse that definitely leans a little bit more yellow and a little bit more slimy. You can actually see it right to the right of these color blocks. In the back, you see some of those changing leaves that definitely pulls a little bit more of that yellow out. So those are the colors I'm going with for this colorway. I'm thinking about speckles, and I really like this light tannish brown sort of color that you see on the inside of the log. And then obviously a lot of charcoal, I think, is what my eye picks up when I see all the rocks in this photo. So that's where I'm thinking I'll start with speckling. We might end there. We might add a few more layers in, but I think that's a good place to start. Okay, we're back over at the sink. I have my dye squirt bottles. I've talked about these before. I believe these are 12-ounce condiment containers. I got these off of Amazon. I've cleaned up my space. The only thing I have out is dye materials, some Tupperware that I hold some stuff in the cabinets. And I'm going to start with that first, that bottom color, that really soft icy blue. I'm going to achieve that by using a really small, the smallest amount that I have and use in some of my colorways, amount of dye that I think is going to work well on its own. I think. I don't think I'm going to layer that color. And what I mean by that is a lot of times when I mix colors into these, and I use about 4 or 5 of them per pan of colorways, depending on the color and how much color and saturation there is. Most times there are multiple dye powders going into this in order to come up with a new color I create. Because this is so soft and subtle, I actually don't think I'm going to need that in order to get the color I'm wanting to achieve. Okay, so here is the first color I was talking about. It looks really saturated here, but don't worry, it's actually not. How I like to test this is dip a little piece. I rip off like rectangles or little pieces of paper towel. I try not to create too much waste when I'm dyeing, so I use a small piece, and I bundle it up so it's a little bit thicker and absorbs color a little bit more truly to what it might look like to put this dye onto the bare yarn. And I just dip a little bit of it in and see how it pulls up the color. You can see there that is super light, and exactly what we're going for. So I think we nailed it with this one. Okay, so the next colorway we're talking about, I just wanted to look to make sure, is that really deep army green that I love. And I normally don't talk too much about what colors I'm mixing into here in order to create my dye stock, but I'm going to do that a little bit more today just to understand color theory. So I have a green base that I think is perfect for this. It's a pretty true green. I wouldn't say moss. Moss might lean a little bit more brown, like a forest green. It's at the base of all of my green, most of my green colorways, parcel tongue, army pants, and flip-flops. And I use it a lot in my variegated colorways. I use it a lot in mixing with other colorways too. I think it does that really well. And I want to tone it down or brown it down a little bit. But I'm not just going to add brown like you might think. I'm actually going to use a little bit of color theory to think about how I'd want to move this color. So if I was going to mix in a straight red, which is the opposite of green on the color wheel, it might make it, that would create brown, right? A true brown in equal quantities. I don't want it to be that brown, but I don't want it to be too far off of that. So then you think about what's on the either side of red. We could either lean more toward yellows, orange and yellow, right? Or we could lean more toward the cool colors, which would be leaning toward purples and blues. I know when you look at an army green and when you look at that picture, it definitely has more warm tones. So I'm going to lean just a little bit next to red and go with an orange that I'm going to mix in with the green and see what we come up with. Just a few notes I want to share because I know I'm not showing y'all when I'm mixing the dye. It's because I'm wearing a mask. It's right here, right there on the counter. I can't reach it without moving you around. I'm wearing a mask. I always add the dye powder first and then add water at a little bit of a warmer temperature to make sure it dissolves. And then sometimes I bring the temperature down depending on the dye powder and how hard it is to dissolve fully. I pull it down a little bit just so I'm not applying such hot dye stock to the yarn. I don't have to wait so long for it to cool down. Here's the green. It's pretty dark. If you can see, it doesn't look very green when you're looking from the outside. And I'm going to flip you around and show you the paper towel. So here's the second color we've created, and it's right next to this icy blue. So far, I think we're doing great. And just letting y'all know on that one, that was about a 4-to-1 ratio of green to orange. So only a little bit of orange for all of that green, and it just dirtied it up a little bit, which I think is perfect. The next colorway we're looking at is that medium grassy sort of chartreusey green. And I'm thinking when I look at that, I see a lot of green that pulls yellow. Not all the way yellow, definitely more green than yellow. But since green is a little bit more concentrated in dye stock, they might actually end up being a similar 1-to-1 or not as large of a ratio difference as the last color we just mixed. Okay, I just mixed the dyes for the third colorway, which is that I called it a grassy green, and then once I dyed it, I was like, oh, it looks like basil. It looks like lime, like that vibrant yellowish green. And sometimes what I do when I'm creating colorways, which is really helpful when you've been doing this for a little while, is look at other colorways and ratios that I use dye in. So I know some of my other green colorways, my tonals, I looked at the ratio and found out that actually for a color like this, I did a 2-to-1 of yellow to green. So that's what I ended up doing, and I'm going to show you right now what it looked like. So this is the third color that we just created. It's that really limey green, and I think it's perfect. And that's a 2-to-1 ratio of yellow to green. The next and fourth color that we're going to try and pull out is that steely sort of grayish with a little blue undertone. So it's going to be mostly gray here with just a speck of blue. And what I'm thinking about is actually using that icy blue that we used in the first color to make sure there's a little bit of cohesion between colors here. Okay, we have our fourth color here. They all look the same. On camera at least, not in person. Sometimes they do. And I think it's really spot on. I did about a 2-to-1 ratio of gray and a grayish blue. So remembering the blue really has a lot of gray already in it, but I think it's perfect and pulls out the icier blue that's going to be really subtle until this helps it pop. So you can see this grayish blue right here, and I'm really liking this colorway so far. And then the last color we're going to look at is a really yellow leaning green. I'm actually going to use a different green dye than I've been using so far. I use the same green in both of the greens here, and I really want it to pull more yellow, maybe even yellow with a little brown. So I'm going to mix up a few different dyes. This is probably going to use 3 yellow, green, brown. We'll see. And see if we can't get it perfect. Okay, I think we got it. The fifth color. And it is definitely yellow, chartreusey. I think it's going to be so good. Let me show it to you. So here you can definitely see it pulls more yellow and brown. One thing to recognize when you're making these is that some colors absorb a little bit more quickly than others. So not a lot of green was absorbed here. It might look a little bit different when we put it onto the skein. But let's pull our yarn out of the oven and see.